This video will review the bleeding of Hayes Dominion brakes. For other brakes, see our bleeding playlist here. Brake bleeding is primarily done to remove air in your brake system. Additionally, bleeding the brakes will replace contaminated fluid. Brake bleeding requires a thorough technical knowledge of the braking system. If in doubt, or if your procedure is not working, contact the brake manufacturer for their model-specific information. It's important to always use the appropriate brake fluid for the brake being serviced. Never use D.O.T type brake fluids in brakes designed for mineral oil. Conversely, never use mineral oil in brakes designed for D.O.T fluid. Mixing fluids can cause damage to components and lead to brake failure. Additionally, you should never share bleed kits between D.O.T fluid systems and mineral oil systems. Typical tools and supplies for this procedure include a compatible bleed kit such as the Park Tool BKD-1.2, appropriate D.O.T fluid for the system, hex wrenches, 5mm, 4mm, 3mm, and 2.5mm may be required, T10 Torx compatible driver like the Park Tool DTD10, piston press like the Park Tool PP1.2, PS1, or tire lever, isopropyl alcohol, clean rags, safety glasses, and gloves. Before we get to the procedure, let's identify the key parts of the brake lever and caliper that are used in the bleeding process. The caliper body will have a brake pad retention pin here. There are two bleed port screws located on the bottom of the caliper. The lever bleed port screw is located here. Begin by removing the wheel from the bike. Elevate the front of the bike so that the air can travel up through the brake line. The brake lever should be close to a 45-degree angle, making the bleed port the highest point in the system. Turning the bars to be in line with the bike can also help. Place something under the bike to catch any fluid that may drip. If you are using the PS1 to push the pistons back into the bore, use it at this time with the brake pad still installed. Remove the brake pad retention pin and pads using an appropriate hex wrench. 3mm for 4-piston brakes and 2.5mm for 2-piston brakes. If you did not use a PS1 but are using a PP1.2 or tire lever to push the pistons back in, use them at this time and push the pistons back into the bore. Note: be careful to push the pistons back in as straight as possible. Install 11mm bleed blocks into the caliper. You may need to get creative to hold them in place. Now remove the caliper from the frame to allow the most vertical path for bubbles to travel. Attach the syringe holders. Time to prep the syringes. Install the red adapters onto the hoses. Install the hoses onto the syringes. The connections should be snug. Fill one syringe 3/4 full with D.O.T 5.1 fluid. Purge any air out of the syringe by pushing fluid to the tip of the hose and then close the line lock. Now fill the second syringe 1/4 full. Again, purge any air out and clip the line lock. There are 2 bleed port locations on the Hayes Dominion caliper. You can bleed the system using one of them, but if there is any air on the other side of the caliper, you will need to bleed the caliper first. Since we do not know where the air bubbles are in the system, we will be bleeding the caliper and then the line and lever. Remove the bleed port screws, then hook the syringes up to the caliper bleed ports one at a time. It does not matter which port gets the 1/4 or 3/4 full syringes. Holding the syringes vertically, unclip the line locks. Pull back on the 1/4 full syringe so that the fluid goes from the 3/4 full into the 1/4 full syringe. Go back and forth between the 2 syringes until no more bubbles are in the caliper. Clip the line lock on both syringes. Leave one 3/4 filled with fluid and the other 1/4 filled. Install the 3/4 full syringe into the syringe holder. Remove the 1/4 filled syringe. It does not matter which port it is removed from. Replace the bleed port screw and tighten to 1.5 Newton meters. Now that we've bled the caliper and purged any air out of it, we can bleed the entire system. Moving up to the lever, remove the bleed port screw with a T10 torque-compatible wrench. Install the 1/4 filled syringe into the port. Unclip each line lock. Now push all of the fluid from the caliper syringe to the lever syringe, being careful not to introduce any air that may be in the syringe into the caliper. Once the fluid has been pushed up to the lever syringe, we can push the fluid back down to the caliper syringe. Push the fluid back and forth until there are no longer any air bubbles coming from the brake system. On the last cycle, push the fluid up from the caliper syringe to the lever syringe while flicking the lever. This helps release any bubbles that may be stuck inside the lever. With no more air in the system and the fluid up at the lever, push the fluid down to the caliper syringe. Clip the line lock on both syringes and place them in the syringe holders. Taking the caliper syringe, unclip the line lock and add a small amount of pressure, then reclip the line lock and remove. Install the bleed port screw and tighten to 1.5 Newton meters. Unclip the line lock at the lever syringe, put a small amount of pressure on the syringe. If you see bubbles in the hose, pull back and try to keep them from entering the system before adding any pressure. After adding pressure, let go, clip the line lock, and remove the syringe. Install the bleed port screw and tighten to 1.5 Newton meters. You have now bled the brake. Give the lever a pull. It should be solid with a fairly short amount of throw. If you are happy with the outcome, clean the lever and caliper with alcohol and then reinstall the brake pads. Remove the bleed blocks before cleaning the caliper. Tighten the brake pad retention pin to 3.5 Newton meters. The caliper should be snugged on the frame when reinstalled. After replacing the wheel, the caliper will need to be aligned to the rotor. See pad alignment in our video playlist. For storing the bleed kit, empty the kit of D.O.T fluid and then let it drain. Then put back in the kit with a couple paper towels to soak up any more fluid. Dispose of used fluid in accordance with local ordinances. That's the process for bleeding Hayes Dominion brakes. Thanks for joining us!